Hello everybody and welcome. My name is Rupa Larkar. I'm a partner at Charles Russell Speechlys, where I advise on construction law and I lead on the firm's India desk. You'll be hearing very little from me today, save as to say how delighted I am and how delighted we are as a firm to be co-hosting this webinar. I'm sure you'll all agree, COVID-19, the lockdown, it has posed many challenges for all, both personal and professional. But for me, I try to look for the silver linings where possible. And it's fantastic that we can still foster cross-border relationships like these through opportunities like this one. Without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to Stephen Denyer of the Law Society of England and Wales, who will introduce our main speakers today. Over to you, Stephen.
So, hello, this is Stephen Denyer from the Law Society of England and Wales, and we are delighted to be co-hosting this with Charles Russell Speechlys. We have a great lineup for you. Simon Ridpath from Charles Russell, AJ Sethi from to talk about the Indian economy, and Atul Sharma, who will be talking about the legal sector. But before coming on to more of this event, I just wanted to do a quick poll of the audience. So to find out from all of you where you're accessing the webinar from today. So maybe you'd like to select either the UK, India, or some other place on the planet, so we get a good idea of where you are. So while we're waiting for the results to come in from that, just to talk a little bit about the Law Society, both in the context of COVID-19 and also in the context of our work in India. In relation to both of those areas, we have quite a central role to play. So far as COVID-19 is concerned, we've been leading the UK legal profession's engagement with the government here in the UK. And in relation to India, we have a long-standing role in relation to the development of bilateral relationships between the profession in the UK and India, and it's a part of the world that I particularly have been following for many years. So just to say a little bit about both of those two things while we're waiting for the poll results. Firstly, in relation to COVID, obviously the first challenge the Law Society, like every other organisation, faced concerned getting our own organisation up and running, and we managed that quite quickly and successfully in a virtual environment. But then moving on from that, we swiftly started to engage firstly the government and then subsequently the profession here in the UK in relation to issues arising from this rather extraordinary circumstance and crisis. So one of our roles, key role, is to represent the profession. We do that in our engagement with government here in the UK, not only the Ministry of Justice, but also the Treasury, the Department of Business, the Home Office, the Bank of England, the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, the Courts and Tribunal Service, the Senior Judiciary, and the Health and Safety Executive. So we really ramped up rapidly our engagement with each of those and had a considerable dialogue, which was rapidly informed by the results of 4 surveys of our members, which highlighted issues to do with adjustments required to the law and regulation here in response to the crisis, but also issues relating to the kind of support and guidance that could successfully and sensibly be given to the profession. We also, as a result of the surveys, found a considerable area for input from particularly us as a professional body in relation to issues such as the successful operation of home working and the challenges of mental health. So that's the COVID element. Turning to the India dimension, where, as I said, the Law Society has had long engagement. It's an extremely important market, as you will be aware, for the profession in the UK. So we've had long-standing engagement with the Government of India, with the Bar Council and other bars and representative bodies in India, with leading Indian law firms, with the High Commission for Britain in India, and over here in the UK with the Department of International Trade and the Ministry of Justice. So that's our picture. I'll be coming back later to facilitate the Q&A session, but here's the result. Very pleasing to see that we have a rather balanced group of participants between the UK and India, and also very interesting and pleasing to see that we have an excellent representation from a number of other places in the world. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Simon Ridpath from Charles Russell Speechley to talk about COVID from a UK perspective.
Thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon, everybody. Effectively, the purpose of today's presentation is to take you through the following key aspects. So a brief introduction, real focus on the UK legal sector before you hear from others who will give you a different perspective from the Indian perspective. Particular focus on UK law firms. I'll talk a little bit about our firm and what we've actually done in practice, and also the courts and the court system. Talk about the new normal, a phrase that's being paraphrased and used an awful lot. I'm not sure anything is normal about what we're currently experiencing, but certainly we will talk about that and some of the immediate changes, and also some thoughts on the longer term impact that the pandemic will be having. So just a brief introduction for those that don't know anything about Charles Russell Speechley. We're a multinational law firm with 11 offices around the world, over 500 lawyers and over 1,000 staff in total. I think we were lucky in some ways that due to the fact that we have a global reach, we were very much aware of how severe the impact of COVID could have on a business, because our Hong Kong office was the first to be affected by COVID-19 very early on in January, and we were able to learn some lessons from that as it moved forward. But I'm a new managing partner. I took over the role, the global managing partner role for the firm on the 1st of January this year, so timing is perfect. Much of my preparation for the role was focusing on ambitions for growth, challenges of Brexit, particularly for the UK offices, and therefore this was not something I'd spent a great deal of time preparing for. So it's important that I give a huge amount of credit to the previous management of our firm, who invested hugely in technology, which has been a huge saviour for us and a massive factor in our ability to continue to trade. It's been an immediate test of my communication skills with our staff and our clients, and really react to the emotional, social and financial impacts that this virus has had on everybody that it's come into contact with. So the immediate impacts of the lockdown, certainly in terms of the UK legal system, I think all of the law firms, lawyers, barristers' chambers operating in the UK have required a colossal shift, primarily in terms of freedom of movement and the ability to actually meet in person. And that's had an impact in terms of how the legal sector itself has responded. It's fair to say, I think, as a starting point, that the UK legal system, certainly the English legal system, would hardly be described as a radical innovator. It's something that's developed organically over many, many years and probably moves at a glacial pace rather than anything revolutionary. But I think everyone is impressed in the way that access to justice has been maintained, and that's a recurring theme. Law firms in particular had to react both in terms of how do you service clients and how do you protect your people and your business. So the main impact in the UK took effect from the 26th of March this year, when Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, announced a UK-wide partial lockdown, which very quickly accelerated by the 26th of March to be a total lockdown. Just touching on a few key points, really, business continuity from our perspective. What did we do? Well, we started monitoring really from mid-March. That meant engaging with the HR aspects of the business, making sure we were aware of anyone who was feeling unwell, anyone who was facing concerns over their health, increased cleaning, deeper cleaning and cessation of travel. As an international firm, we closed that down very quickly. We also introduced flexibility around travel, working hours. IT made an investment in Chromebook, for example, to enable non-fee earning staff who didn't already have laptop technology to have access to IT and to enable to work from home. And we also ran and had the ability to run a full-scale test of our systems. So we actually closed one of our UK offices in mid-March with very few people having advance notice of that, so that we could check how the IT infrastructure worked, how our client responses worked, postal service, back office teams and others, so that we had the opportunity to learn in advance of the wider lockdown, and all of those lessons really helped. In terms of client service, law firms received a huge amount of guidance and support from the Solicitors Regulation Authority, particularly around issues such as compliance and client confidentiality and due diligence checks. Once you had the inability to meet face-to-face, this had a direct impact on things such as conveyancing, changes to client due diligence and anti-money laundering procedures. And those practical changes have very much been welcomed and have enabled most law firms and businesses to continue to take on new clients and service existing clients. Things such as verification of identity by video call and broadening the number of people who can verify identity has been a massive help. The SRA has also recognised the impossibility of face-to-face contact in other areas. So it's built into its best practice and ethical guides ways of actually reacting quickly to the remote working environment we find ourselves in. The major impact has been the turmoil caused to everyone's lives, and specifically clients of law firms and our firm. We've really focused on strength of client relationships, and that obviously requires proximity and regularity of contact. We've been lucky in that we've been able to continue that through the use of technology. But I've also found that there's a greater demand for that input from clients. There's a real thirst for guidance, because this is something that very few people, if anyone, certainly in the UK, has experienced before. There is a real need for problem solving and guidance at the highest level, which we've been able to plug into in many areas and has been really useful. Again, I think people appreciate no one really has the answer to every problem, but by sharing lessons learned, supporting clients closely and just listening, we've been able to add some value wherever we can. In terms of law firms generally in the UK, obviously as the weeks go by, as businesses, there's been a negative impact. So you've seen things such as pay cuts, redundancies, reduced hours in terms of how firms are reacting. We've obviously spoken publicly about the steps we've taken. So we've increased volunteering hours. We've furloughed some staff who simply cannot do their jobs remotely, such as front of house, but we've maintained 100% wage pay for those. We've reduced our partner drawings to improve our cash flow and to protect the business against the tremors that are being felt across the world and interrupting quarterly profit. We've also increased our pro bono access, and we've set those up via webcam clinics in absence of being able to offer law clinics directly. The personal challenge for me has really been maintaining the balance between the operational functions of the firm, so cash collection and the like, the increased need for me to sign off on everything because people are particularly anxious about making decisions and the impact that they may have, but also ensuring that I'm empowering our partners to stay close to clients, monitor trends in markets, and have faith and confidence that the firm itself is in safe hands, and it's their job to make sure our clients come through this as positively as possible. In terms of the courts, remote hearings is probably the main headline. Obviously, when the rest of the UK economy closed down, the court service had to find a practical solution. There were new practice directions introduced at the end of March, and further guidance and protocols through the Coronavirus Act of 2020, which allowed video and audio hearings. And actually, after a short interregnum, I think it would be fair to say that with the clarity of message provided by those protocols and guidance, a large number of hearings are proceeding, and the courts are embracing the technology largely. Probably the headline is the one that's referred to on the slide, which is the National Bank of Kazakhstan versus BNYM, which was the first financial list trial to be conducted entirely remotely. And effectively, the judiciary are increasingly confident that actually the technology will work and they are able to opine and hear the evidence in as good a form as possible. Obviously, it's not ideal and it's certainly not normal, but it is the new normal. And I think that has made a significant difference to people's confidence. So what is the new normal in that sense? What will coming months bring? Certainly from our perspective, being a multinational firm, actually the UK is the furthest behind of all of our offices. Most of our other offices across the world are now either reopened fully or at least open partially for business and certainly for client business. We're working hard on our own systems in the UK, but obviously government guidance remains that if you can work from home, which we can, you should continue to do so. But I'm conscious that there are people within our own firm who are desperate for social reasons, if nothing else, to get back to the office environment. And equally, there are others who will struggle to do so because of childcare responsibilities and other things. In terms of future thoughts, I mean, the immediate impact in terms of the legal sector, there's an uptick in perhaps what you'd think are the obvious areas. So restructuring advice, insolvency advice, employment, technology-led solutions, and dispute resolution, all areas that you would naturally see in a time of turmoil picking up. But I have seen it suggested that there'll be a turbo boost to the legal system as a result of COVID. I think you could see that in terms of embracing technology, use of agile working in the services sector and implications for technology and infrastructure. You could certainly see that some of the changes we've been forced into through necessity may become permanent. But I think things such as AI and the use of it, which has been a buzzword in the legal context for some time, will continue to be relevant. I think beyond short-term pandemic direct impact, you will be talking about some of the more permanent changes in terms of infrastructure, probably an acceleration of retail as a sector, moving into a more technology and online basis, changes to investment approaches concerning commercial property, people working more remotely, more virtually, the investment opportunities for those who've invested long-term in commercial property probably will see a change of strategy and approach. And all of those things, I think, will be more medium-term changes that we will see adaptation to. I think in terms of the courts and some of the regulations that I mentioned earlier, I think the relaxation of the rules on due diligence and client confidentiality probably won't be here to stay, which means a continued emphasis on proper due diligence of clients and compliance work. I do think that greater thought will need to be applied to the way contracts are negotiated. Obviously, force majeure clauses, which have remained unchanged for many, many years, probably will need to change, as will the insurance market. But I think the digital future for our legal system is probably here to stay. I think it's one of the more permanent changes. I think the access to justice has proven to be sufficient for many. I think that what we will see is greater defined use of when technology or online hearings will be used, as opposed to face-to-face hearings and arguments in person. I think cross-examination, where necessary, will probably still be one of those things that will be best determined by face-to-face engagement. But I do think that the natural resistance that was there prior to this point, simply through a lack of confidence in the technology, may have been permanently eased by this current crisis. I think in terms of law firms, finally, the way that we work, again, the use of real estate, commercial property, will firms reduce their footprint and embrace working from home? I think you've got to set against that the balance of learning experience, shared experience, collaboration. I think anyone on this webinar today will accept that hopefully the technology is holding up, and it's certainly better to communicate in this forum than in any other, or in no other. But it's a poor relation to be able to have this conversation face-to-face with each of you and to actually engage without the use of technology as an interface. And I think trying to work out a better balance between those two is certainly going to be the big challenge for the management of law firms and the legal sector more generally. Thank you ever so much for listening and for your time, and I'll pass you over to AJ.
Thank you, Simon. A pleasure to be here. While all of you are sitting in cloudy London, some of us are sitting in fiery Delhi, which is where I'm sitting right now, with a 40-degree temperature, which is slowly coming down now. It's really a pleasure to share this platform with Stephen, Simon, Atul, and Rupa. I must say a special thank you to Rupa and Preeti, who conceptualized this entire webinar. And then together with Libby, Charlotte, Sophia, and Catherine, they gave it this final shape. And looking at the people who are attending and the numbers there, clearly they have done a super job. I hear you, Simon, and I agree fully with you. This word new normal has been, the way people are using it, it's becoming people want it to become a normal. I don't know how will you build up corporate cultures without the team culture, because the teams generate and build up the real culture after that. So I don't know about that. And then I miss this feeling about, standing with a drink and a pub, backpacking, exchanging drinks, and now you are looking at each other with suspicion. So if we are not very careful as a race, we might end up becoming a me and mine race. That might become the new normal. I hope not. So let me jump into my presentation. I'll jump this pretty slide of mine. So I'm talking about the economic aspects of this COVID-19 and specifically in terms of India. So let's look at India before the COVID-19 era, BCE. And I'm looking at the numbers which are from February 2020. And look at the global rating agencies. These are Fitch, S&P, Moody's. So while we were not doing very well in February as a country, we were going through a tough time, and the challenges was the rising food inflation. We were having non-performing assets in the banks, and private sector was not too impressed with whatever the government was doing. In spite of that, the agencies gave us in financial year 20 5% GDP growth, which was supposed to go up to 5.6, and by FY 2022 it was supposed to touch 6.5. Even the fiscal deficit was looking rather tamed, because the budget is what, 3.3, and we were looking at that we'll end up with 3.6. Inflation was not too bad, and ease of doing business ranking was dropping in a way, making us better. So that's the situation we were sitting in Feb, in spite of Indian economy not doing too well. And then comes in COVID, and these are numbers based on May 2020. And that's the COVID era, CE. And there you see what the global rating agencies have rated us at. So FY20, because we had a bloodbath in the last quarter, so 4.2%. Now the agencies expect us to dip and contract by, and there are varied views. IMF also has a view. So anywhere from -1 all the way to 2% is where we will end up as an economy on GDP growth rate basis. But they expect us to bounce back very quickly. Their fundamentals are still strong. Indian demand is still quite strong. Fiscal deficit for the coming year is going to be sitting at something like 5.3 instead of the 3.5 budgeted. Inflation is obviously going to go up. The challenges which were already there, weak private sector, tepid job creation, financial system which was not very fantastic, and now that we are going to increase the debt burden because the government is going to borrow. So that's the situation which we are faced right now. And let's have a look at the world along with this. What is this is a chart. I thought this was a good chart for this discussion out here. The green snake you see is the Japan snake. Then you got the US in red, and this very cooling and nice color blue is UK. And then you have India with that orange color, which is waving up on the top. This gives you an idea from 2000 onwards, the GDP growth rate of each country. It's very interesting to see that, of course, while the Western and the developed countries in the 2020 are going to take a large dip down, this is IMF projection, you will see that India dips only to 2. As per IMF, we are going to go to 2%. I personally don't agree. I think we're going to be hitting somewhere lower. But they feel we'll go up there and then we'll start climbing back virtually immediately in the next year. That's what is projected out there. And if you see the very interesting thing in 2009, you will see that in 2008-9, there's a dip by everyone, and that's the Lehman Brothers crash. So one of the things which is being talked about by many economists and many people in the world is that the situation today, if we are able to find the cure and get back to our feet very quickly, the recovery would be similar to what we had in the time of 2008 when the Lehman Brothers crash came through. Moving on to how the Indian government took up this challenge, I would break it into 3 parts, and that's what I'm doing, is what they did immediately, what they come out with the stimulus package, and what is the path ahead. That would give you a feel of what the government did. I think the government did the right thing on the immediate path. They immediately went for saving and expenditure, which we are doing as businesses, as Simon also mentioned a while back, when you are dealing with cash flows. So government decided to suspend dearness allowance payment to government employees and pensioners. That was the first step. To mobilize some extra resources, they immediately put an excise duty or a cess on fossil fuels. But this was illogical, by the way, if you see it, because the fuel cost was coming down. But if you see it from the way they decided to mop up, that was approximately 1.4 trillion Indian rupees which are targeted through this. And the third thing the government did, they increased their borrowing by 54%, that is from the targeted 7.8 trillion Indian rupees all the way up to 12 trillion. That was the target, to meet extra expenditure which is bound to happen now. And then we come to this famous stimulus package, which the government has outlaid 20 trillion Indian rupees package. If you break it down, actually, if this package, and it's a very big paper, so I've tried to pick up the best or a little bit which would make sense out here. The central bank, the Reserve Bank's aid which was in the form of small and medium enterprises and to the non-banking financial corporations, 40%, which was announced before the stimulus package. So that is part embedded into the 20 trillion package. That's 40%. Then the government's collateral-free loans to the small and medium enterprises and other refinance options is about 30%. And then agricultural sector and migrant workers who have suffered, and food to the unprivileged is 30%, and there's a host lot of smaller little activities sitting across there. So this forms the entire package. And you see, when you go down the list, there are some interesting things which are there, like the government will release payments, outstanding payments within 45 days. Insolvency proceedings limits have been increased because now it's bound to be, there are many companies which are bound to default. So they have logically raised the limits so that we don't have unnecessary cases going on. Labor has been liberalized, and some states, Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, and some states have taken this on, saying that for 1,000 days, that's what in a nutshell what they're saying, for about 1,000 days, most of the rules will not apply. I think the government will have to put this back, they'll have to roll this back because there's a lot of backlash coming from this one. And along with the stimulus, the government slid in. They very quietly slid in some ease of doing business issues or reforms. I think the big one, the big daddy sitting there is the defense foreign direct investment limit from 49 to 74%. I think this is going to be a big attraction because India is on the front end of defense equipment manufacturing as we walk along, and many and technology will be needed. So I expect this to be a big push there. What does the government have in hand ahead? I think what are the challenges in the COVID era now, the CE period? I think reviving demand is going to be a big one because people are now going to hold on to their money. Bringing back the labor force, I think, is going to be a mother of all problems, if you personally ask me, because unlike China, labor out here could not be classified as very disciplined. We are a democratic country, so is the labor. They have gone with a feeling that they were not really wanted or they hadn't been taken care of. Getting that feeling out of them. And then there's the monsoon period coming up in India now for the next 2-3 months. And then comes the festive period for which they normally go home, which is the Dashara and the Diwali period. So I suspect getting the labor back is going to be a very big challenge. And that is going to have a direct impact on the businesses coming back. And of course, managing public spending is going to be another one. I think if I was to, you can later on look at the ones I've written and what is written out there. But I think if I was to pick up one sector which really enjoyed this whole movement and managed to make real money, is the e-commerce section, which is really, really picking up and is going to be there for the long term now. It would be very worthwhile before I close down. I think I've got a couple of more slides after this one. How did the Indian industry react to the whole thing? Because if the GDP, and this is where we as accountants come into play. So the GDP growth rate is declining, disposable income is reducing, and discretionary spending is logically coming down. How do companies react to that particular problem? Because what happens in this situation is most companies cut down capital expenditure, which means even if you're supplying direct to the market or you're supplying direct to another company, most companies put the first block, they block out the capital expenditure, which most of the law firms might have decided not to buy any more hardwares, laptops, and make do with whatever you have, no more new infrastructure. That's a logical reaction to these things. And when that happens, it starts putting the burden on the system, and the next thing you know is you're getting a cash flow problem. And later on also the industry have a problem where even when it opens up, the entire logistics chain is so squeezed. It's so badly squeezed that it's going to be very difficult to really get it back into shape quickly. There's going to be log jams later. The Indian manufacturing sector, the positive side is that the Indian manufacturing sector may gain in the medium term, because compared to China, there might be some hedging which might happen, and we are hoping on that. And then as a good Indian, I have a particular hope that India may come out of COVID faster, though the situation as it's developing now may make me eat the humble pie. And moving ahead, I mean, how do we tackle it with our clients? Normally the way we have been advising our clients on these issues is we try to see what sector they fall in. So on the left hand side, you see there are these green colors, orange colored, and the red sector. So the green colored sectors are the ones which are doing well and will continue to do well. The red ones, obviously the airlines, the hotel industry, the leisure industries, the real estate segment, these are the ones which are going to be having a very difficult time in the recovery phase. Even if they stabilize themselves in the next 1 year, it's going to be 2 or 3 years before they really come back into the game. The orange sector is in between somewhere, these particular sector. The way we look at the whole thing is we see if there's an effective cure within 3 months and if there's not effective cure within 3 months. And that's the way we start to look at the whole thing, and then we match it to the sector, and then we take a probability risk on how you're going to perform. Whichever way you look at it in India, the bottom line is that the financial year has been reduced to 9 months. We are not looking at a financial year. The first quarter is really a washout. So it's July 1 onwards, we're looking at the whole thing. And there is a supply chain problem which is really going to effectively start from 1st July because it's very squeezed. The supply chain is all over the place. So the recession is definitely imminent. I mean, it's already there, but it's a problem area for us in India. And therefore, the entire game plan is going to be creating a cash war room and making cash the central figure in your discussions. All these CEOs and MDs and marketing people who have been talking about top lines and bottom lines, all this has got to stop, and we have to focus on cash flows and rolling cash flows. And of course, there's a whole little exercise we do around that: treasury management, expense savings, where to cut, how to build it up, how to roll the cash flows every day, literally. As a managing partner of my firm, I'm rolling cash flows every week nowadays. So I come to my last slide before the next speaker comes in. And just to give you an idea of risk and opportunity, how does it look to the outside world? I think globally the risk are the trade wars to India. The trade wars is a risk because as people are talking, as globalization is giving way to nationalization, so the global trade wars are starting. We could get crushed in between these trade wars. The geopolitical situation at India borders, which has always been a little bit of a stress. Personally, I don't think anything's going to happen, but I have to put the risk there. And how do the policy and markets react to the post the US presidential elections will also have a bearing as much on the world as on us. The opportunities are at our end that the demand from the Indian market is still very high. The middle class is growing at a tremendous pace. The Make in India is a hedge against China. And there we have very close ties with Europe, US, and Japan as I speak to you, not to forget UK and Australia. So we have a very good bucket created on that opportunity side. The domestic side, I think the risk factor which I can talk about is the old one. The three are the old ones: labor, land, and logistics. This I don't think. I think there has to be a lot of political will. But in the short term, liquidity is a problem, and tax collections for the government is a problem. But on the bigger side, on the opportunity side, the increased push towards infrastructure projects. It's a great job creator also. We are expecting a bumper crop this year. There is increased focus on Make in India, and there is an increasing employment in rural India. So I think I've given you a fair picture of how things, and I personally think that bouncing back for India is going to be very logical in the next year itself. Just a very quick overview about our firm, and that's it. I won't dwell into it, but I can just tell you that as an accounting firm, we have done rather well for ourselves, and in 30 years, we account for amongst the top 10 Indian consulting and accounting firms. And I can very easily tell you some of our largest clients are companies coming from international, Japan, US, Italy, France, and UK. Thank you once again. And I now move it on to Atul, who will now give an overview of the Indian legal system.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you so much. Well, I'm delighted to be a part of the panel of and I'm indeed grateful to CRS for taking the initiative in organizing this. And of course, we have had extremely useful inputs from Simon as well as Ajay. And Ajay, of course, I indeed appreciate the positivity that you have brought into the whole discussion, considering that we are going through a very, very bad phase. But what I propose to do is I propose to deal with the impact on the Indian legal system primarily. And of course, towards the end, I will come out with, of course, I've not factored that in this presentation, but I'll certainly try to give you a feel of what I perceive as the areas which are ultimately going to, give business to law firms and lawyers in India. First of all, the biggest problem, the impact, I'll deal with this whole presentation into 4 segments. And the first is firms, how it has impacted the individual practitioners, how it has impacted the litigation system, and how it has impacted the arbitration system. Now, so far as law firms are concerned, of course, I was amazed, to be told on 28th of March at about 4 o'clock that from tomorrow onwards you wouldn't have access to your office. You will have to pick up all your stuff, move home. And I can say one thing with surety, that I have learned more technology in the last 2.5 months than I've learned in my whole life. So that's the only upside. But the fact remains that the dislocation was so phenomenal that I had huge infrastructural issues, really relocating myself and the whole firm, in fact, virtually overnight from office to home. Work from home is a culture which India is not used to. I mean, the West has been used to it, and more so America. But it has been a huge culture change, and to really adjust to the whole norm of working from home. I'm an old school lawyer who used to papers and reading books. For me, it has been a big change. But the fact remains that necessity is the mother of invention, and of course I have been able to adjust myself substantially, and I have not visited office for almost 2.5 months now. So far as the transactional work is concerned, the transactional work, the corporate teams have been used to working online. They've been used to online data rooms. They've been used to exchanging documents over the internet. They've been negotiating documents over phone calls. And they're also used to closing transactions, issuing closing opinions as well on the online. So that way they didn't have a lot to adjust. But they also, in the context of the research tools that you have available, of course, research tools are common to all disputes as well as transactional lawyers. But they were struggling with, for example, if we had 10 people able or 15 people able to use the online research tools at the same time, we suddenly had to up it to 15 or 20 or 30 people need to do it, because you don't have access to the central system. The other problem with the firms have faced is the idle infrastructure cost. If somebody asks me a question, really, do I really need a big office in the central business district? Well, sometimes the answer from within is no, absolutely not. Having worked from home and having done whatever we were expected to do, in terms of delivery from our homes and through the technology, do we really need that real estate? Is it a cost worth it? Well, that's a question. I don't know whether I don't have an answer. I have an answer today. I don't have an answer today. But probably 3 months, 5 months down the line, every law firm will be revisiting this. Of course, cash flows issues, because there was a sudden knee-jerk reaction within the whole system. Everybody felt that heavens have fallen, and everybody started, squeezing the cash flows. The clients were, trying to defer payments. We didn't know how to manage the billing systems. We had to relocate the billing system. We had to relocate the entire technology relating to timesheets. So all that, obviously put a lot of pressure on the cash flows. Now I'll move to, now if we talk in the Indian context, I think if we believe that we law firm people believe that we represent the business in the country, I think we are sadly mistaken. In India, the whole legal practice comprises of about a million lawyers across the breadth of the country who are individual practitioners. And they have only small chambers, maybe 1 or 2 juniors. And they don't have access to the infrastructure that we law firm workers are used to. So they have had huge bandwidth issues, and they really, imagine, for me, it was such a change. How would it be for a private practitioner who's told that from tomorrow onwards, you will not be working from your chambers, you will be working from home. And of course, you won't have access to the courts. In fact, in the Bar Council of India chairman has in fact petitioned the Supreme Court that because of the non-functioning of courts, the professional revenues are drying up for private practitioners, and they are actually on the verge of extinction. So this is something which is a very serious issue which the business needs to take care of. And there is a growing demand by a large number of these practitioners to open access to courts in the conventional sense. One, of course, the impact on litigation has been phenomenal, because ever since the lockdown started, the courts stopped functioning altogether. All the courts were suspended. Slowly and gradually, people started realizing that something has to be done about it. And then the courts started, the Supreme Court and the High Courts started, opening their doors for online hearings. But online hearings have been confined only either to urgent matters or through or with the consent of the other side, which is rarely coming, because in every dispute, one of the parties would be keen on, ensuring that the dispute doesn't progress, because that party would benefit from the delay. Of course, none of the courts were geared up for this kind of situation. They had huge infrastructural issues. Today, even the Supreme Court of India, the system that they have, I was very unfortunate the other day. I was arguing a matter, and the other side finished arguing, and before I could actually start, the control room had switched off my mic and my video. Well, the court thought that I have nothing to submit, and I had to suffer an order, which was unbelievable. And I could really, and I had no answer to the client that, look, because the client, they had limited logins available. I had no answer to the client, and the client believed that I purposely did nothing about their matter. Now, of course, I'm constrained to file an application for reopening of those issues. If you look at the number of fora that has gone up in the last 20 years, particularly after the opening up of the 90s, the entire list of fora increased manifold, because large number of tribunals under different businesses. For example, under the Electricity Act, we have the state commissions, we have the National Commission, we have the appellate tribunals. Similarly, in insurance, we have different courts which are quasi-judicial. In airport sector, in telecom sector, all those, there are large number of tribunals and quasi-judicial bodies who never had these facilities available. And these tribunals were obviously restricted in a big way in really managing. They are still struggling with it. In fact, many of these forums have not started functioning. And those who have started doing it are finding it very, very difficult to manage. And there again, it's only the urgent matters which are coming up. Coming to the impact on arbitration, the majority of arbitrators, and in India, unlike many other jurisdictions like Singapore or UK, the emphasis is on ad hoc arbitration. And in fact, we are only awaiting a big step in creating an institutional infrastructure. So majority of the arbitrators are ad hoc, and most of them are retired Supreme Court judges or High Court judges who are past their working age. They have severe limitations on technology. They have absolutely no institutional support. But they have also started picking up the threads of technology, and they have started, at least, because of course you can hold the all kinds of hearings, including the procedural hearings, but it's very difficult to really run a process of evidence recordal through these systems. There's a lack of consensus on virtual hearings, because out of 3 arbitrators, say for example, 2 will say, well, I am happy doing a virtual hearing, and I am very happy to be used to a technology. You could have the other, maybe 1 or 2 were saying that I'm sorry, I'm not too keen. Well, of course, it's becoming more and more significantly important for people to learn technology, and the people who are not so obviously adapted to technology are finding it extremely difficult to hold arbitration hearings. Cross-examination is the biggest challenge. Now, Having said that, I must mention that the Delhi High Court has recently come out with the regulations for video conferencing. And surprisingly, these regulations do talk of cross-examination, and they talk of a court point, a remote point, documentation visualization processes, and they have tried to create a coordinator to ensure that no person is in the room when the cross-examination is going on. So it's a difficult task. This is so far as the pure legal practices is concerned. I'll just say a few last words about where do we see the business going. Of course, Ajay was very clear as to what are the sectors and which are going to boom. And of course, I see online commerce and online education. I was surprised to find the other day that online education is the most booming business. Restructuring is going to be big business, but of course, the recent amendments of the prorogation for or suspension of some provisions of the Insolvency Act have not helped the cause, because that will reduce the kind of work available to lawyers. On online retail, FMCG is going to be a big business. Disputes, of course, the moment the lockdown came, we had a spate of inquiries from contractors in the infrastructure sector, the developers in the infrastructure sector, because they wanted to understand the impact of lockdown, particularly from the perspective of force majeure. So these are certain areas, and just a word about Link Legal. Link Legal is a mid-sized Indian firm with offices in 6 cities in India, and we have virtually all practice areas as a full-service firm, and we are indeed delighted to be serving a very high quality of clients. So I'll leave you with that and hand you back to Stephen.
So thank you to everybody. There's a lot to take in from what's been discussed. We have quite a short period of time, so I don't think we'll be able to cover all of the questions within the next 5 minutes, but I'm sure we'd be happy for those of you who can to stay on a little bit longer to pick up 1 or 2 more questions. Firstly, so as it says on the screen, if you have questions, put them in the questions box. If we don't have time to cover them orally, then we will respond to them in writing subsequently as part of the follow-up. But just before coming to the first question, we have another and final poll for you to complete. So let's just take a look at that. So that's just a question about the biggest challenge you face as a business. So get filling that in, get sending any more questions in. But I wanted to begin with a question for the panel, which picks up on the point that AJ made about India and China. So what do you see, AJ, in particular, that might manifest itself in particularly some of the well-known challenges that India has in areas like labour laws, for example?
I think, yeah, I'll be very brief. I think labor-wise, we can never ever compete with China in the near future because they have very focused labor laws. We have liberalized labor laws, as I just mentioned, which basically means that the labor laws have been put out to hang for the 1,000-day period. I think it will be rolled back very quickly. So unless the government takes a very serious step on this one and takes other political parties into confidence, it won't work. And honestly speaking, since you asked me to be very brief, I expect this to be a very uphill task for the government because labor laws will not change so quickly in India. Do you want me to take up?
Atul, any short thoughts on that?
happened is that labor reforms have been the most sticky issue, especially because the whole plethora of laws is so complex that it's very difficult to really put them into a code and really believe that you would have covered every exigency that you believe you will encounter. And the problem is not merely the laws. The problem is the psyche and the political backing of some of the unions. And it's believed that having a job is your birthright, and of course you can't be fired unless, and even if you're fired, the challenges to the action are enormous. So I believe it's a huge mindset issue also, which is going to be a big problem. And of course, I tend to agree with Ajay that we'll find it very, very difficult with such a maze of laws to really compete with China in labor matters.
Sam, a slightly different question for you. So we've heard a lot about the shape of the recovery, assuming there is going to be a recovery. What do you think that means for later in the year, the prospects for M&A activity between India and the UK? And any particular thoughts on what sectors that might be in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still quite hard to really predict how the recovery will shape itself. But I think the reality is for all the challenges we face, there are always opportunities. So I think the opportunities, particularly to utilise technological advances and really accelerate the rate of change through technology. So the most obvious ones will be to try and amalgamate. I think you'll see retailers, for example, looking to get into distribution networks, improve their distribution networks and supply lines, and where you really see international M&A grow, I think will be the assimilation through growth of businesses to shorten the supply chain and improve the integrity of it, so you're getting from A to C much quicker. So I do think that you're going to start to see changes along those lines that will increase activity in that space. But I think the services sector generally is going to be one of those that will be hardest hit and slowest to recover, I think, whilst they slowly reopen. Certainly London, it's going to be hard for the UK economy to really get back up to full pace.
And broaden it out a little bit with Atul and AJ, how do you see the prospects for cross-border work involving India later in the year?
Well, Stephen, I believe that there's going to be an uptick in the cross-border activity, and that's, of course, subject to what Ajay believes. For the reason that the large number of targets will become attractive, and the valuations are going to be such that once the things settle down, the market would have bottomed out, and there could be good opportunities for people who are interested in cross-border deals. In fact, it's believed that that's going to be a big area M&A, which will be emanating from outside of India. And subject to what Ajay says, I believe that law firms should gear up for that kind of business.
AJ, any thought on that?
Yeah, I think the first part I agree with Atul completely. I'll just add some sectors to it just to make it, I think retail, we will see some action because India on the retail side is, we are a little primitive, at least on the supply chains and the service chain with supply retail. I do expect action there. I expect action on the fintech side because India is going to move into digital in a big way. So I do expect action on that side also. And I do expect on the technology side, which is more inclined towards defense, I expect action on the M&A side specifically there, because the industries which we have out here, their machineries, their technology are very outdated, and I think UK still holds a power out there. And there could be, if the Indian government opens up, I think education would be the fourth one which I would put into that segment.
A final question. which is on the more pessimistic side, and it concerns insolvency. So, Simon, we've seen some recent reform of insolvency law. How do you see that impacting the situation in the UK, and how prepared do you think the legal sector is for insolvencies? And then I'll finally turn to Atul and AJ for an Indian perspective on insolvency, and then I think we'll stop.
I think it's a very interesting challenge for the insolvency market in the UK. As a former restructuring lawyer, it's something it's close to my heart. But it's interesting that you've heard. Certainly, I was on a recent chat with Baroness Morgan, and they were talking about adopting sort of a debtor finance approach to restructuring, something much closer to the Chapter 11 system that's operated in the United States. And as I said to her, I think the real stress is that the way that finance is available for restructuring in the United States is fundamentally different to that in the UK. Our creditor-led process in this country, there just wouldn't be the financing around available to allow Chapter 11 style restructures to work. So I think the temporary suspension is consistent with government policy to preserve jobs. But I think overall, you really need a healthy level of insolvencies and restructures to really help renew the economy post the COVID challenge. So I think they would be well advised not to meddle too much further with legal changes to the current structure, which is one we're very familiar with.
Atul, how does it look from an Indian perspective? Are you geared up for lots of insolvencies?
Stephen, I see a lot of opportunities for restructuring, but my concern is slightly different here. If we look at the history of what has happened in the last 2 to 3 years after the new book came into picture, while opportunities have been below, a large number of resolution plans have failed. And they failed not because they are not worth it. They failed because of the system, because the whole infrastructure has not kept pace with the timing within which such resolution plans must be implemented and brought to fruition. There's a lot of legalese which is woven around the whole economic side of this business, and unfortunately, that I think is a big impediment. And of course, the recent suspension of 3 sections is not going to help the cause, because that is going to lead to more litigation. For the reason, because that provision, what it says is that for any defaults which have happened after 25th of March for a period of 6 months, you cannot initiate any insolvency proceedings. I don't know whether it's a wise decision, because it is going to lead to a lot of complicated disputes, including whether it's prospective, it's retrospective, what constitutes a default, whether it's a default which was pre-existing, whether it's a default which has actually happened during that period. All this, while the government is trying to help the business, but I don't think they're really helping. And so I see the problem is going to be on the delivery side rather than the opportunity side.
And final word to AJ.
Yeah, I think because you're right. I mean, the insolvency laws are in a very nascent stage in India. So yes, but some of the case laws in the past, which is the SR case and the other big ones, they have laid some foundation to what the law should be like. Now, for the Indian government to react to these case laws and make the processes faster would be one challenge. But coming from as a financial advisor to companies, and this is the area M&A is what I work on personally as well. I think what is going to happen is that once insolvency proceedings start, and once we go over after say about 6 to 8 months, once this first settlement of COVID goes through, I think there'll be some really nice assets waiting to be cherry picked by foreign investors sitting in the kitty of the insolvency courts. And that could start a whole range of things specifically for the lawyer community as well as for the financial consultants.
Thank you. So before we finish, let's just see the survey results. There we go. Biggest challenge, operational issues, working from home, engaging with staff, maintaining client service, some way behind that, but ahead still of the challenge of advising on COVID rules and regulations. So with that, I should thank the panel. Of course, were we all sitting comfortably in the wonderful facilities at Charles Russell Speechlys, you'd be giving them all a clap. You're strongly encouraged to give them a clap, but they won't be able to hear you. So you can do it within the comfort of your own home, like all the best things at the moment. A final word from Rupa.
Thank you, everybody. Just to echo my thanks as well to all the participants today, and to all the panelists, and to all you that have logged on. And any questions or queries that you may have which weren't addressed during the course of this webinar, please feel free to send them through to us, and we will redirect them and come back to you as soon as we can. Thank you all.